You are destroying yourself not through obvious vices or acknowledged weaknesses, but through your goodness, through your noble intentions, through your commitment to being moral and responsible and selfless person who does what is right regardless of personal cost. This destruction appears as virtue from outside, is praised by others who see only your service and dedication. But beneath the appearance of goodness is architecture of harm, is systematic dismantling of your own well-being in service of abstractions and obligations that demand everything while providing nothing. The architecture of this self-destruction is built from good intentions. Each decision seems justified, each sacrifice feels necessary, each suppression of your own needs appears as moral requirement rather than as self-betrayal. You are not being destroyed by external forces, but by your own commitment to being good, by beliefs about what virtue requires, by internal demands that masquerade as conscience but are actually psychological tyranny disguised as moral necessity. This is most insidious form of personal destruction because it is invisible to the person experiencing it, is defended by the very goodness that creates it, is maintained through belief that suffering in service of others or ideals is noble, rather than recognizing it as pathology. Understanding how good intentions lead to personal destruction requires examining the mechanisms through which morality becomes a weapon you use against yourself. The first mechanism is the tyranny of the should, the relentless internal voice that tells you what you should do, who you should be, how you should feel, creating impossible standards that can never be met, and demanding constant self-sacrifice in pursuit of ideals that were never yours but were internalized from parents or religion or culture. The should is experienced as moral imperative, as voice of conscience, but is actually psychological violence, is constant judgment that you be different than you are. You should be more patient, more generous, more selfless, more productive, more grateful, more forgiving, more willing to sacrifice. The should is never satisfied because satisfaction would eliminate its function, which is not to guide you toward genuine goodness, but to maintain constant inadequacy that prevents you from ever feeling acceptable or worthy or allowed to prioritize your own well-being. This tyranny creates self-destruction because you organize your entire life around meeting these impossible demands, sacrifice your actual desires and needs in attempt to become who the should tells you that you must be, exhaust yourself pursuing standards designed to be unachievable, interpret every failure as evidence of moral inadequacy rather than as evidence that the demands themselves are unreasonable and destructive. The good intention is to be a moral person, to live according to principles, but the mechanism turns this intention into a weapon, uses your desire to be good to create constant self-attack, transforms morality into an impossible burden that crushes you beneath weight of demands that can never be satisfied. You are destroying yourself through trying to be good enough, through believing that virtue requires constant self-sacrifice, through accepting that your needs and desires are obstacles to goodness, rather than recognizing that true virtue would include care for yourself rather than only care for others, or for abstractions that feel more important than your own. Life. The second mechanism is addiction to being needed, the way you construct identity around being a person who helps and supports and sacrifices for others, who gains worth through service, who feels valuable only when providing what others need, or fixing their problems, or carrying their burdens. This appears as generosity but is actually dependency disguised as virtue, is need to be needed that masquerades as selfless giving, is compulsive caretaking that serves your psychological requirement to feel important. The addiction creates self-destruction because you cannot say no without experiencing existential threat to your identity, cannot establish boundaries without feeling selfish, cannot prioritize your own needs without unbearable guilt. You take on more than you can handle because refusing would mean facing that your worth does not depend on constant service, would require developing identity, not organized around being needed. This compulsive helping destroys through exhaustion and resentment, and through preventing development of genuine self that exists independent of service role, through creating relationships where you are used rather than valued, through attracting people who want what you provide rather than who you are, through ensuring you never have time for your own life because you are always managing everyone else's. The good intention is to be helpful, to make positive difference, to be someone others can count on. But the mechanism turns this into addiction, where your well-being depends on others needing you, where you unconsciously ensure people remain dependent because their independence would threaten your identity. You enable rather than help, create dependencies rather than empowering others. Sacrifice yourself not because necessary, but because being needed is only way you know how to feel valuable. The destruction is masked as virtue, is praised by those who benefit from your inability to stop giving, is reinforced by social narratives that celebrate self-sacrifice while ignoring its costs. You are destroying yourself while believing you are being noble, are creating conditions for breakdown while experiencing it as moral obligation. The third mechanism is perfectionism, disguised as conscientiousness, the belief that anything worth doing must be done perfectly, that mistakes are moral failures rather than inevitable aspects of being human, that your worth depends on flawless performance. This perfectionism appears as high standards but is actually self-torture, is impossible demand that generates constant anxiety and prevents satisfaction regardless of accomplishment, because nothing meets the standards you have internalized. The perfectionism creates self-destruction through paralysis and procrastination, through preventing you from attempting what you might not do perfectly, through making every task overwhelming because perfect execution is required, through destroying enjoyment in activities that become performances to be judged. You cannot write because the writing might not be perfect, cannot create because creation might reveal limitations, cannot try new things because initial incompetence feels intolerable. The perfectionism also destroys through making you brittle and defensive, through requiring that you hide all flaws, through preventing vulnerability and genuine connection because being seen as imperfect feels like being exposed as fraud, through creating constant performance anxiety where every interaction is tests you might fail. You cannot be wrong because being wrong means being worthless, cannot make mistakes because mistakes prove inadequacy, cannot acknowledge limitations because limitations contradict the perfect image you believe you must maintain. The good intention is to do your best, to be competent, to produce quality work, but the mechanism turns this into tyranny where your best is never good enough, where competence requires perfection, where quality means flawlessness that is impossible to achieve. You are destroying yourself through standards designed to make you feel perpetually inadequate, through beliefs about worth that tie it to impossible achievements, through refusing to accept that being human means being imperfect, and that trying to transcend this through perfect performance is not virtue, but is psychological violence. The perfectionism prevents the very excellence it claims to pursue because fear of imperfection prevents attempting, because anxiety sabotages performance, because constant self-criticism destroys confidence and creativity and willingness to take risks that excellence requires. The fourth mechanism is the belief that your needs are less important than others' needs, that prioritizing yourself is selfishness while sacrificing yourself is virtue, that good person puts everyone else first and attends to their own well-being only after everyone else has been served, which never happens because there is always someone whose needs can claim priority over your own. This belief creates self-destruction through systematic neglect of everything that would sustain you, through treating your own well-being as luxury that must be earned, through serving others rather than as foundation that must be maintained to have anything to offer. You do not rest because others need you. Do not pursue your interests because time should be spent on more important things. Do not maintain friendships or activities that bring joy, because these feel like indulgences. When others have problems, or when work demands attention, your life becomes entirely instrumental, exists only to serve purposes beyond itself, has no intrinsic value that justifies caring for it, simply because it is yours. This systematic self-neglect destroys through depletion and burnout, through creating life that feels empty because it contains nothing for you, through ensuring you have nothing left to give because you never replenish what you spend, through making you resentful and bitter, even while you continue performing the service that is destroying you. The good intention is to be generous and selfless, to care about others, to not be narcissistic or self-absorbed. But the mechanism turns this into belief that caring for yourself is moral failure, that having needs makes you weak or selfish, that your well-being does not matter or matters less than everyone else's. You are destroying yourself while calling it virtue, are creating conditions for collapse while believing you are being noble, are sacrificing what is necessary for sustainable living while experiencing the sacrifice as moral requirement rather than as pathological self-betrayal. The destruction is invisible until it is catastrophic, accumulates silently while you maintain appearance of coping, builds toward breakdown that appears sudden but was result of years of systematic neglect disguised as selflessness. The fifth mechanism is the need to be good person, to maintain identity as moral and righteous, to never be the villain or the one who causes harm. This need creates self-destruction through requiring constant monitoring of your behavior, through making every action subject to moral evaluation, through preventing spontaneity and authentic response, because these might reveal that you are not as good as you need to believe you are. This need to be good also creates destruction through preventing acknowledgement of your shadow, through requiring that you deny your capacity for selfishness and cruelty, because acknowledging these would threaten the good person identity, through forcing you to project your darkness onto others who become enemies carrying what you cannot own in yourself. The good person cannot be angry, so the anger is suppressed or justified as righteous. The good person cannot be selfish, so the selfishness is denied or reframed as self-care, so you can better serve others. This creates split between who you perform being and who you actually are, between the moral image you maintain and the actual human, with flaws and dark impulses who exists beneath the performance. The split requires constant energy to maintain, creates internal tension between performance and reality, prevents integration of shadow that is necessary for psychological wholeness, ensures you remain fragmented and at war with yourself while believing you are being virtuous. The good intention is to be ethical person, to live according to values, to not cause unnecessary harm. But the mechanism turns this into compulsive performance of goodness that prevents authentic living into need for moral certainty, that requires denying complexity and ambiguity, into identity so fragile that any recognition of your darkness feels like existential threat. You are destroying yourself through refusing to be human, through demanding that you be only light without darkness, through believing that goodness requires eliminating rather than integrating the shadow, through making your worth dependent on maintaining impossible moral purity that no human can achieve. The sixth mechanism is sacrificing yourself for abstract ideals or causes that demand everything while providing nothing, that require you to subordinate your life to purposes that transcend individual well-being, that justify any personal cost in service of greater good that may never be achieved. The ideology or cause becomes more important than your life. Your suffering becomes noble when framed as service to the cause. Your destruction becomes meaningful when interpreted as martyrdom for principles. This creates self-destruction through making your life instrumental to abstractions, through treating your well-being as acceptable sacrifice for ideological purity or political victory or religious salvation or any transcendent purpose that justifies subordinating actual human lives to theoretical goods. You work yourself to exhaustion for the cause, sacrifice relationships for ideological correctness, deny yourself pleasures or rest because these feel like betrayals of principles you serve. Experience your suffering as badge of commitment rather than as warning. The good intention is to serve something larger than yourself, to dedicate your life to meaningful purposes, to not be purely self-interested. But the mechanism turns this into fanaticism that destroys you in service of abstractions, into willingness to sacrifice anything, including your well-being for principles that do not care about you, into belief that your suffering is meaningful when it serves the cause, rather than recognizing that the cause that demands your destruction is parasitic ideology that consumes its adherents. You are destroying yourself while believing you are serving higher purpose, are creating conditions for annihilation while experiencing it as noble dedication, are treating your life as expendable in service of causes that will continue without you and will find new adherents to consume when you have been used up. The destruction is masked as meaning, is justified through narratives about sacrifice and service, is reinforced by communities that celebrate martyrdom while benefiting from your self-destruction. The cause becomes more important than the people serving it. The abstract good matters more than concrete well-being. The seventh mechanism is the belief that suffering is virtue, that difficulty proves worthiness, that the hard path is automatically the right path, that if something feels difficult, it must be good for you, while if something feels easy, it must be suspect or indulgent. This belief creates self-destruction through making you choose suffering when ease is available, through interpreting pain as evidence of moral superiority rather than a signal that something needs to change. You stay in relationships that harm you because leaving would be easy path. Remain in work that destroys you because quitting would be giving up. Continue commitments that exhaust you because breaking them would be failure. The suffering becomes identity, becomes how you know you are a good person, becomes evidence of dedication. You are addicted to difficulty, cannot trust ease, must make everything harder than necessary to feel virtuous. The good intention is to not take easy way out, to be willing to do hard things, to not avoid difficulty when necessary. But the mechanism turns this into compulsive choosing of suffering, into belief that pain is proof of virtue, into making your life harder than it needs to be, while calling this moral strength. You are destroying yourself through manufactured difficulty, through rejecting help and ease, as if these are moral failures. Conclusion: the architecture of evil built from good intentions operates through mechanisms that transform virtue into self-destruction. Impossible moral demands, addiction to being needed, perfectionism, belief that your needs do not matter, compulsive performance of goodness, sacrifice for abstract ideals, and equation of suffering with virtue. Each mechanism appears righteous, is defended as moral necessity, is experienced as what good person does. The destruction is invisible because it is praised, is reinforced by narratives about selflessness, is defended by your investment in being good person. Breaking free requires recognizing that true virtue includes care for yourself, that goodness that destroys you is not actually goodness, that intentions matter less than outcomes. The work requires dismantling beliefs about virtue that have organized your life, facing that what you thought was noble was pathological, building new understanding of goodness that includes your own well-being,